Come in. Come in. Don't stand there dripping in the doorway. That's it. Pull the door to behind you and let the latch drop. The wind's got teeth tonight, hasn't it? Straight off the Pennines, cold enough to strip the leaves from the oaks. Here, let me take your coat. Soaked through, I see. Well, you're not the first to misjudge a Cumbrian sky. That's the bar over there, and Tom will see you right for a pint. I'll be by the fire if you want company once you've warmed your hands. Right then. Settled? Good. You'll have passed through Croglin on your way here, I expect. Small place. Blink and you'd miss it. Just a handful of houses strung along the Eden Valley, a church, and that old fortified farmhouse sitting up on the hill. Croglin Low Hall, they call it now. Used to be known simply as the Grange, back when the Fisher family held the land. Strange building if you've seen it. 2 stories, thick stone walls, narrow windows. The sort of place built to keep things out during the border wars. But there's one window on the ground floor that's different from the rest. Bricked up solid. Has been for 150 years, give or take. Ask the locals why, and most will shrug. Old house, they'll say. Dam problem maybe. Structural issues. The usual explanations people offer when they don't want to talk about the real reason. But there are still a few. The very old families who've been here since before the railways, who'll tell you what they heard from their grandparents. And what they heard was this. That window was sealed because of what came through it one summer night in the 1870s. Something that shouldn't have been walking at all. Now, before you start thinking this is going to be one of those tales with capes and castles and aristocrats with pale faces, let me set you straight. This isn't Transylvania. This is Cumberland. And the thing that came to Croglin Grange wasn't elegant. It was withered, brown, ancient. More like something you'd dig out of a bog than something you'd meet at a ball. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me pour you the context first. The way it was told to me. The story comes down through a gentleman called Augustus Hare. Writer, he was. The sort who collected ghost stories the way other men collected butterflies. In 1874, he was at a dinner party, proper Victorian affair, all silver and candelabra, when a neighbour of his, Captain Fisher, told him something that had happened to his family. Not hearsay, mind you, not a friend of a friend. His own family, at their property in Cumberland. The captain said the Fishers had owned land around Croglin for centuries. Ancient lineage, that lot. But by the 1870s, most of them had moved south to Surrey. Couldn't make the northern estates pay any more, I suppose. So they leased the Grange out to tenants. Enter the Cranswells, 2 brothers and their sister Amelia, city people looking for peace and fresh air. The sort who thought the countryside was all wildflowers and gentle rambles. The Grange suited them perfectly. Single story back then, or so the story goes. Long and low, sitting on a terrace with a view over the valley. Comfortable, respectable, and close, very close to the churchyard of St. John the Baptist. That geography matters. Remember it. The Cranswells settled in well enough. They were liked in the area. Generous with the poorer families. Pleasant company at the few social gatherings the valley could offer. Everything was perfectly ordinary until the summer turned savage. Forget your Gothic storms. Forget your howling winds and rattling shutters. This particular horror began in silence and heat. It was one of those summers that shouldn't happen this far north. The kind where the air goes thick and still, where even the birds stop singing by midday. An annihilating heat, one account called it. sort that makes you stupid with exhaustion, where you can't work, can't think, can barely move. The Cranswells spent their days under the trees, listless. The nights were worse. The house held the heat like an oven. The thick stone walls that kept out the winter cold now trapped the summer warmth inside. Sleep became impossible. And that's how the vulnerability crept in. In a normal summer, the Cranswells would have followed the old northern habits. Shutters closed at dusk. Windows latched and barred. The house sealed tight against the night. But in that heat, with the air pressing down like a wool blanket, those old precautions became unbearable. So on the night in question, late July by most reckonings, when Amelia retired to her bedroom on the ground floor, she made a decision that seemed entirely reasonable at the time. She left the heavy wooden shutters open. She merely latched the window, hoping for a breath of breeze. Then she lay in the darkness, unable to sleep, watching the trees beyond the glass. The churchyard was just visible through the branches. Old graves, most of them. Weathered stones leaning at angles. A low wall separating the dead from the living. And then, in that hot stillness, she saw lights moving between the headstones. 2 points of brightness, darting and weaving. At first, she thought they must be lanterns. Someone visiting a grave, perhaps. Though who would choose to do that at midnight was beyond her. But as she watched, something about the movement seemed wrong. Too quick, too low to the ground. And they weren't moving like someone walking. They were moving like something hunting. The lights came to the churchyard wall. They paused there for a moment. Then they came over, across the belt of trees, out onto the lawn, straight toward her window. And that's when Amelia realized they weren't lanterns at all. They were eyes. She couldn't move. That's what she said afterward, when she could finally speak of it. The heat, the shock, the sheer impossibility of what she was seeing. It pinned her to the sheets as surely as if she'd been tied down. The thing crossed the lawn with a shuffling, uneven gait. Not slow, mind you. Fast enough, but wrong. The way a puppet moves when the strings aren't quite right. As it came closer to the window, the moonlight caught it properly, and what Amelia saw froze the scream in her throat. It was shaped like a man, but only in the way a scarecrow is shaped like a man. The proportions were there, but everything else was off. The face, and she would never forget that face, was the color of old leather left too long in the sun. Brown, shriveled, the skin drawn so tight over the skull that every bone showed clear, and those eyes, those burning, terrible eyes that had tracked her from the churchyard. It came right up to the glass. For a moment, nothing happened. The creature stood there, swaying slightly, as if considering. Amelia lay rigid in her bed, perhaps 10 feet away, every muscle locked. She wanted to run, wanted to scream for her brothers, but her body wouldn't obey. Then she heard the sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A fingernail on glass, testing it, exploring it. The sound stopped. A pause that seemed to last forever. Then a new sound began. Pick, pick, pick. It wasn't trying to break the window. It was doing something far more methodical, far more patient. You have to understand how these old Cumbrian windows were made, not like your modern glass. These were small diamond panes, each one held in place by strips of lead, cames, they call them. Soft metal, pliable if you knew what you were doing, and the creature knew what it was doing. It had selected one pane near the latch. Now it was using something, a long, hard fingernail, yellowed and curved, to peel back the lead, working it loose with the precision of a craftsman, pick by pick, strip by strip. The sound was almost conversational in the silence. Pick, pick. A tiny pause while it adjusted its grip. Pick, pick. Amelia watched the lead curl away from the glass. She watched the pane begin to rock in its setting, loosening with each careful manipulation. She tried to make her voice work, tried to form the word that would bring her brothers running. But fear had stolen her breath. Pick, clink. The diamond pane fell inward onto the carpet with a soft sound, like a dropped coin. The hand came through the gap, not a human hand. The fingers were too long, the joints too prominent. The skin had that same brown, desiccated quality, stretched over bone with nothing between. It moved with horrible purpose, reaching for the latch. The metal clicked. The window drifted open on its hinges. Finally, Amelia found her voice. She screamed. The creature moved faster than anything that looked so withered had any right to move. It was through the window and across the room before her lungs had emptied. She felt its weight on the bed, felt those terrible fingers twist into her hair with a strength that seemed impossible from something so apparently fragile. It pulled, dragged her head back over the edge of the mattress, exposing her throat. She had one clear glimpse of its face, the brown mummified features, the eyes that burned with a hunger that had nothing human left in it, the mouth opening to reveal. The bedroom door crashed open. Her brothers, woken by the scream, still in their nightshirts but with a pistol in hand. The creature's head snapped toward them. For an instant, the four of them were frozen in a strange tableau. The brothers in the doorway, Amelia bent backward over the bed, and the thing crouched above her. Then it moved, released her and scrambled for the window with that same unnatural speed, moving like a spider, all wrong angles and too many joints. The brother fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. The muzzle flashed bright as lightning, but the creature was already gone, vanishing through the window and into the darkness beyond. They found Amelia unconscious. When they revived her, they saw what the thing had done. 2 marks on her throat. Not deep. The brothers had arrived in time to prevent that, but enough. Enough to leave her weak and shaking. Enough to send them fleeing south within the day. They took her to Switzerland to recover. Stayed away for months. The Grange stood empty through the autumn, through the winter. Some said the Cranswells would never return, that they'd broken their lease and counted themselves lucky to escape with their lives. But the brothers were made of sterner stuff than that. Or perhaps stubbornness runs deep in city folk who've paid good money for country peace. Either way, the following March, they returned to Croglin, and they came prepared. They didn't announce their arrival, didn't light every lamp in the house. Instead, they settled Amelia in a different room, one on the opposite side of the house, and the brothers took turns watching that ground floor bedroom, the one with the window that faced the churchyard. They sat in darkness with loaded pistols across their laps and waited to see if the thing would remember. It remembered. 3 nights they waited, 3 cold March nights with nothing but the wind and the bare branches scraping at the glass. Then, on the 4th night, they heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. One brother remained in the bedroom, crouched behind the door. The other positioned himself outside the window, concealed in the shadows of the house. Pick, pick, pick. The same methodical sound, the same patient dismantling of the lid. But this time, there would be no surprise. This time the crowdswells were the ones doing the hunting. The pain fell inward. The withered hand reached through, searching for the latch. The brother by the window stepped out and fired at point-blank range. The creature shrieked. Not a human sound. Something between a scream and a hiss that seemed to come from a throat that hadn't drawn proper breath in decades. It reeled backward, clutching its leg, then turned and fled across the lawn. But this time it was limping. This time it left a trail. The brothers didn't hesitate. They grabbed lanterns and followed, tracking the dark stains across the grass, through the belt of trees, over the low wall, right into the churchyard. The trail led them directly to one of the old family vaults, the Fisher Vault, as it happened. The door hung slightly open, the lock broken years ago. They didn't go in, not in the dark, not alone. Instead, they marked the spot and went back to the house, where they sat up until dawn, pistols loaded, watching for any sign of return. None came. When morning broke cold and grey over the valley, they went to find the sexton. The sexton was an old man called Pearson. Been tending that churchyard for 40 years he had. Knew every grave, every vault, every family that lay under those weathered stones. When the Cranswell brothers told him what they needed, he went very quiet. "The Fisher Vault," he said finally. Not a question, a statement. He fetched his keys and a crowbar. Didn't ask them to explain further, didn't need to. Places like Croglin have long memories, and the older families know. There are some things you don't question aloud. You just deal with them when the time comes. The three of them walked across the churchyard in the thin morning light. Frost crunched under their boots. Their breath hung in the air. The vault stood at the far end, half hidden by a yew tree that must have been ancient when the first Fisher was laid to rest. The door, as the brothers had reported, was already ajar. The iron hinges were brown with rust, and the lock had been forced some time in the past. Grave robbers most likely, looking for jewellery or lead from the coffins. They'd have been disappointed. The Fishers weren't wealthy enough to be buried with much worth stealing. Pearson pulled the door wide. The darkness beyond smelled of damp stone and something else. Something sweet and wrong, like meat that had been left too long in the larder. They lit their lanterns and went inside. The vault was small, perhaps a dozen coffins stacked on stone shelves cut into the walls. Most were old, the wood green with mould, the brass plates tarnished black. But it was immediately clear that someone, or something, had been living here. If you could call it living. Several of the older coffins had been pushed aside or knocked to the floor. The lids were broken, the contents scattered. Bones lay where they'd fallen, mixed with rotted fabric and tarnished metal. It looked like something had been searching, or nesting. In the far corner, on the lowest shelf, was a coffin that looked different from the rest. Newer, perhaps, or at least less decayed. The lid sat slightly askew, as if it had been opened and not quite closed again. The brothers looked at each other. One of them nodded. Together they lifted the lid. Inside lay the thing from the window, the brown, shrivelled thing with the terrible eyes. In death, or whatever passed for death in something like this, it looked even more desiccated. The skin was drawn so tight you could count every rib, every vertebra. The fingers were curled into claws. The mouth hung open, showing teeth that were far too long. But it was the leg that confirmed everything. Fresh blood. Dark, yes. Thick as treacle, but unmistakably fresh. and in the withered flesh of the creature's left leg was a bullet wound, still seeping. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The lantern light flickered over the impossible thing in the coffin. Finally, Pearson crossed himself and stepped back. "Burn it," he said. His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he raised the lantern. "Burn it all." They didn't take it to the church for a service. Didn't inform the vicar. This wasn't a Christian burial gone wrong. This was something older. Something that predated the church itself, perhaps. The hungry dead, some called them. The ones who couldn't let go. They dragged the coffin, creature and all, to the far edge of the churchyard, well away from the other graves. They piled it with dry wood from the sexton's shed, poured oil over the lot. Then they set it alight. It burned for hours. Long after the coffin wood had been reduced to ash, the thing inside kept burning. The smell was indescribable. Not like wood smoke, not like meat. Something chemical and ancient, like peat or pitch. By the time the sun reached its zenith, there was nothing left but a greasy stain on the frozen ground and a pile of ash that the wind would eventually scatter. The Cranswells stayed at the Grange for the remainder of their lease, nearly 2 years more by most accounts. They never had another visitor in the night, but Amelia never slept in that ground floor room again. And before they finally left for good, they paid a mason to brick up that window permanently. The story might have ended there, might have been forgotten. Just another strange incident in a small northern village. But Captain Fisher told it to Augustus Hare over dinner in 1874, and Hare wrote it down in his memoirs. By the 1890s, it was being repeated in London drawing rooms and spiritualist circles. By the 1920s, people were coming to Croglin asking to see the window. Some folks say the whole thing was invented, point out that the details match a bit too closely with a penny dreadful called Varney the Vampire, published 30 years before the event supposedly happened. Say the captain borrowed the scratching at the window, the picking of the lead, and spun it into a family legend to impress dinner guests. Maybe they're right. Maybe it is just a story stolen from cheap fiction and grafted onto an old Cumbrian farmhouse. But I'll tell you this. Croglin Low Hall still stands. You can walk past it tomorrow if you've a mind to. And that window on the ground floor, still bricked up, has been for 150 years. The current owners don't talk about it much, but every now and then, someone's staying in that room because they've made it into a storage space now, safer that way. Reports hearing something. Usually on hot summer nights when the air goes still and heavy. A soft sound like fingernails and stone. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The fire's burning low now. Let me add another log before you head out into the cold. There we are. Listen to it crackle and spit. Here's to the Cranswells, who came back when most folk would have run. Here's to old Pearson the sexton, who knew what needed doing and didn't flinch from it. And here's to staying curious about the old places, the old stories, even when they unsettle us. The past isn't always dead, you see. Sometimes it's just sleeping. Sometimes it's waiting in a vault with a broken lock, hoping someone will forget to bar the windows. Now then, the rain's eased off, I see. You'll have a clear walk back to wherever you're staying. Mind how you go, and if you're passing through Croglin on your way, if you happen to glance up at that old farmhouse on the hill, the one with the bricked up window, well, just keep walking, eh? Some windows were sealed for a reason, and some reasons are best left undisturbed. Safe travels, and keep your shutters closed. You've been listening to British Pub Law. Mind how you go.